into God's Word. Lord, we thank you so much for your Word. God, it's not something that we take for granted. It's something that we cling to, God. Your Word is something that we love. And so let us take your Word this morning and not just be hearers, but be doers of your Word. Let us take it and apply it to our lives, walk it out in our lives in the following weeks and months and years, and let us grow in our relationship, grow in our discipleship of you. We praise you, God, in everything that we do. In Jesus' name I pray. Everybody said, amen. Have you ever had one of those moments in life where you had the thought, what in the world is happening right now? Maybe a better question would be, how many times a day do you have the thought, what in the world is happening right now? Depending on what stage of life you are in, you'll ask that question about very different situations. You have to know that on the day that you were born, you may not could have vocalized it, but you were thinking, what in the world is happening right now? You grow up, you go to school, your very first day of school, and you're thinking to yourself, what is happening? And then you grow up and maybe you get married and you're with your spouse and you're trying to figure out how to make a budget for the first time, and you're having those first budget fights, and you're trying to figure out personal finances and all the stuff that goes with that, and how to pay the bills before the money runs out every month, and you think, what is happening? Maybe you're a family with young kids. If you're a family and you have young kids, you probably ask this question during this phase of life more than any other time of life. And I say that because I cannot imagine asking the question, what is happening right now, more often than I'm asking it in my life right now with a 3-year-old and with an infant. The other day we were taking pictures of Brantley. I don't remember what it was for. When they're first born, you take pictures of everything. Like everything's a first. Oh, it's the first time he sneezed. Let's take some pictures. I don't know what we were taking pictures of, but we were taking some pictures of Brantley, and we were all out in the sunroom, and I was walking away, and Danica said, Ryan, come look at Judah's ear. She was very concerned about his ears. And so I walked over, and I got Judah, and I set him up on my knee, and sure enough, there was a couple of black spots that looked like in his ear, almost looked like little scabs. And so I reached in there and I saw if I could get them off, and they weren't scabs because he hadn't scratched inside of his ear. And sure enough, I got them. I got both of them out of his ear, and I'm looking at them in my hand, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And so I turn them around to the other side, and sure enough, there was another one in the other ear. And I grab it out of there, and I put him in my hand, and then I realized what my son had done. And I said, Judah, have you been picking your nose and putting it in your ear? And he looked at me, and as serious as he has ever been in his life, he said, yes. I said, son, we don't do that. And the thought went through my head, what is happening in my life right now? What is happening? We move on through the stages of life, and I don't know from experience, but I'm sure that when your kids hit milestone birthdays like 13 and 18 and maybe 20, you think, what is happening? When your kids start moving out of the house, and when you're empty nesters, you think, what is happening? Because things change. No matter what stage of life you are in, though, if you drive in Blytheville, Arkansas, you consistently ask yourself the question, what is happening right now? I have rarely ran across the driver in Blytheville who can make the S-curve by Delta Auto Parts and stay in their lane the entire time. They can't do it. And I think to myself, what is happening right now? It's like they don't even see me here. And I will be the first one to admit that in my car, when it's just me, that I will rage a little bit and I may scream out, and then I'm okay after that. And I've really tried to stop honking at people because I realize that I pastor a church in a small town and I've got to stop honking at people. So I've really tried to work on that. I was sitting in traffic one day by the overpass and I was trying to turn right, and there's a car that was in front of me. And it was clear for a long time. There was nobody coming as far as we could see. We were both turning right. It's an easy turn to make. And they're just sitting there. And they sit there, and they sit there, and they sit there. And about 30 seconds, which seems like about a year and a half when you're waiting on someone to pull out, goes by. And finally, I had all that I could take. And I screamed out, "What is happening right now?" And I forgot that Judah was sitting in the back seat. And he said, "Dad, we're going home. Stop screaming." And I said, "Okay." But sometimes you just have to ask yourself the question, what is happening? And sometimes we ask this question about funny things in life that happen and trivial things, but sometimes we ask this question about really serious, really deep things in life. We look at the landscape of our society and the landscape of our culture, and we see people killing babies every single day, and you have to ask yourself the question, what is happening? What's going on? We see students going into their schools and mowing down with guns their fellow classmates, and you have to ask yourself the question, what is happening? We see people of all skin colors look at other people, different skin colors, and hate them because of the way that they look. And the only thing that you can do is think to yourself, what is happening? How did we get here? Bring it a little bit closer to home. You raised your kids in church. You prayed over them every day whenever they were little that they would find relationship with Jesus. And now they're grown and they're far from God, and you ask yourself the question, what is happening? How did we get to this point? What's happening right now? You believed for your healing. You had faith for your healing, and you wake up the next day and you're still sick, and you ask yourself the question, what is happening? What's happening right now? Let's take it a step further. What do you do when you feel like you have heard a promise from God, but you do not feel any progress on the way to that promise? And you have to step back and ask yourself, what's happening? Where are we at? I don't feel like there's any movement. God, I feel like I heard from you, but I don't feel like I'm any closer to the promise than I was a day ago or a week ago or a year ago. So what is happening? And I think that we can learn a lot on how to deal with this question from the story of Abraham and Sarah as they waited on their promised son, Isaac. And so we're going to look at their story this morning. Let's begin in Genesis chapter number 15 and verse 1. Genesis 15 and verse number 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram, though later his name will be changed to Abraham, in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. So God comes to Abraham and he says, hey, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to give you a great reward. How many of you, if God came to you in a vision and said that, you would be like, sign me up, this sounds great. But that's not what Abraham says. Verse number 2, but Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. The first thing that we learn from the story of Abraham is that we can be real and righteous at the same time. You can be real and righteous at the same time. Can we just get into it this morning? God is not afraid of your questions. God is not scared of your fears. God is not worried over what you have doubts about. The amazing thing about God is that He knows every detail that there is to know about me. Every fear, every worry, every doubt, and He still wants to have relationship with me. He knows every fault that I have, and He still pursues me in relationship. God tells Abraham, hey, I am going to give you a great reward. You're a righteous man. I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to bless you. And Abraham says to God, well, it really doesn't matter, God, if you bless me with things, because I don't have any heirs to pass these things on to. You haven't given me any kids, so why would I care about more stuff? See, Abraham and Sarah were rich. They had done very well for themselves financially in their lives, but you need to understand that when God puts a desire in your heart, when God puts and gives you a promise behind that desire, then you can have success in every other arena of life and you can still be miserable. We think more money will fix it. How deceived we are to think that more money and more stuff will fix everything. More money, more problems. More money, more problems. Abraham had all the stuff that he could want, all the money that he could want. And God says, I'm going to give you a great reward. And Abraham says, I don't even want it if you won't give me a son. It doesn't matter at all if there is no heir to pass this stuff on to. Whenever we were waiting on Brantley, I've told the story before, so I won't go into great detail or great depth, but we tried to get pregnant for over a year with Brantley, and month after month after month, it was so disappointing when we would realize that we weren't pregnant again that month, and we prayed and we thought, God, we'll raise this child that you give us in a Christian home. We'll do our very best to raise them to love you. We'll protect them. We'll provide for them. We watched the news of moms giving their kids away and leaving their kids in trash cans and on doorsteps, and we think, my God, I know I can do better than that. I may not be perfect, but God, I'll do better than this. And we didn't understand. We were real with God, and we cried, and we prayed, but we also trusted. You can be real with God and righteous at the same time. You can be real with your doubts and still trust in the sovereignty of God at the same time. God is not afraid of your questions, but He still wants your faith. He's not afraid of your questions, but He still wants your trust. You can ask questions and you can be real, but when God speaks, He wants your faith. Abraham didn't have any kids, and when God promised to make a great nation out of him, Abraham trusted God, and that was counted to him as righteousness. You can be real and righteous at the same time. Let's continue in the story. We're going to move over to Genesis chapter 16. Look at verses 1 through 6. Now Sarai still, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. We're going to circle back to that in a minute. Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. Verse number 3. So after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. Wait a minute. This was her idea in the first place. May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. And Sarai dealt with her harshly, and she fled from her. The next thing that we learn from the story of Abraham is that we make a mess when we try to force God's timing. We make a mess when we try to force God's timing. It's easy to read this story over the few chapters that it's contained in Genesis and not feel the weight of the time that had passed from the time that God said, Abraham, I'm going to make nations out of you, and they're going to be my people. And when Abraham actually held his promised son. This text in Genesis 16 tells us that they had lived in Canaan for 10 years. It was 11 years from the time that God said, Abraham, I'm going to give you a promised son, and the time that he was given his firstborn son, not his promised son, but his firstborn son, Ishmael, through Hagar. 10 years passed before Sarah went in and said, hey, this isn't working. It's not going to happen. Maybe we should try this. Maybe God needs our help. Maybe we should step in and just give God a little nudge. And what happens when we try to step in and give God a little help is that we make a mess of things. Genesis 12:4 tells us that Abram was 75 years old when he was first promised a son. That's a miracle in itself. He was 100 before he ever held his promised son in his hands. 25 years of waiting. 25 years of second guessing, of praying, of wondering, God, did I miss it? Was the vision wrong? Did I do something wrong in this 25 years, God, that you would not have given me what you promised? Danica and I had to wait for a year to get pregnant with Brantley. And it was like torture, month after month. I can't imagine God speaking to you and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a son, and I'm going to make nations out of your family. And then waiting for 25 years before you held the promise of God in your hands. We force God's timing when we start trying to work things out for God on our own, as if he can't do it without us. There's a key phrase in the text where everything got sideways for Abraham, and it is, and Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. Now, husbands, don't go home, don't you dare go home and say, Pastor said it was a mistake to listen to your wife. That is not what I am saying. Almost every time you should listen to the voice of your wife. That's about the loudest amen I've gotten from the women in a while. Almost every time you should listen to the voice of your wife, except for when you've heard the voice of God and what she's saying stands in direct opposition to what you heard God say. We read earlier, Abraham heard from God, I'm going to bless you with a promised son. But we see in Genesis 16 that Abram listened to Sarai. Even well-intentioned people will get your life all messed up if you listen to them over the voice of God. You have to know that there were some days when Abraham prayed, God, you promised me. I heard you. You promised me that you were going to give me a son. Lord, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not getting any younger. I was 75 when you made the promise, and now I'm 85. And now I'm 90. And now I'm 95, and I still haven't got the promise that you gave me. Did I hear you right so long ago? God, don't you think that it's time that we got started building this great nation that you said we were going to build? And you have to know that Abraham said, what is happening right now? Because it doesn't feel like anything is going on. It doesn't feel like I'm any closer to the promise than I was 20 years ago, God. So what is happening? What's happening? We've already learned from Abraham that it's okay to ask God questions, but the difference between the first time in Genesis 15 that he questioned God and God answered him and he accepted it, and now the second time in Genesis 16 is that he started to take action on his own. He stepped out of the perfect timing of God, and he created a big mess for everybody. In case you didn't know, his firstborn son, Ishmael, went on to father many nations because God promised that his son would father many nations, and he kept that promise because he saw how hurt and the pain of Hagar, Ishmael's mother. The nations that were created from Ishmael were Arab nations. In Christianity, we look back at our forefathers as we say we have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Ishmael plays the same role for Muslims. He's said to be a forefather of the prophet Muhammad. Theirs is the God of Abraham and Ishmael. Still fighting the same fight today. Why? Because Abraham decided he was going to take action outside of the perfect promise timing of God. You'll create a big mess for yourself, and by the way, for a lot of people around you, when you step out of the timing of God. God will often wait until his promise is impossible for us to complete on our own, so that when he shows up, there is no doubt who deserves the glory for what has happened. If Abraham would have had a child as a young man, then people would have looked at him and thought, hey, you know what? They've got it together. He's doing really well financially. He's got Sarah, and now they'll have an heir to pass their things on to, and all of their stuff onto, and all their fortune onto. Look at how blessed they are. But God waited until he couldn't have done it on his own. Some would make the argument that 75 would have been that he couldn't have done it on his own. But he waited until he was 99 years old before Sarah conceived a child. At that time, she was 89. It was a miracle all the way around. But God wanted to be certain, he wanted to be sure that his name was the one that got the praise. When it seems impossible for you, watch out, because that's when God is most likely to move in your life. When it seems like you have no more options, when it seems like the only thing that you can do is lose, when it seems like you can't win anymore, when it seems like it is impossible for you, when it seems like all of the odds are stacked against you, watch out, because God is primed and ready at that very moment to step in and do what only he can do in your life, so that his name will be the one that gets the praise. Abraham didn't want to wait. Abraham forced the timing of God, and it cost him greatly. It cost him greatly. Don't step out of the timing of God, because in his timing, all things are perfect and all things are right. Let's move on. Genesis chapter number 21. The Lord visited Sarah. Verse number 1. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord said to Sarah as he had promised. Verse number 2. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Wait a minute. We need to go back and read verse number 2 again. I must have read that wrong. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Monty, it's almost like God planned it that way the whole time. God didn't forget about his promise to Abraham for a quarter of a century. It was exactly as God had planned it the whole time. When God very first came to Abraham and said, hey, I'm going to give you a son, and I'm going to make a nation out of you, God knew full well that it would be 25 years before Abraham held that promised son. In the fullness of time, it happened. Verse number 3, Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have bore him a son in his old age. We learn from the story of Abraham, when we trust in God's timing, he will bring joy into a barren situation. When we'll remain faithful to the timing of God, when we'll put faith in the promises of God, God will bring joy into what seems like a barren situation. There are a couple things that you got to grab from this text in Genesis 21 if you're going to make it through a season when you're asking yourself, what is happening? What is going on? Verse number 2, we've already talked about it. It says that Abraham got his promised son at the time of which God had spoken. He got his promised son when God planned on him getting his promised son. It was a 25-year wait, but it was exactly the moment that God had planned it. God didn't forget about his promise to Abraham. I don't believe that it was God's intention to torture Abraham and Sarah for 25 years. The truth is that we will probably never know why God made Abraham and Sarah wait for 25 years to hold their promised son. And just like we'll never know why God made them wait for 25 years on their promise, we'll never know why God takes us through seasons of waiting from promise to promise. And it's okay. If I may be so bold, I want to give you permission this morning. When God tells you, I'm going to give you this. When God promises you something, I want to give you permission. If a month later, a year later, you still haven't seen any progress toward that, I give you permission to say, God, what is happening right now? What is going on in my life? Is there something that I need to be doing? Have I stepped out in some way that I need to come back? What is going on in my life? What is happening? We have permission to do that as long as we understand that it's in God's perfect timing that he delivers his perfect promises. And only in God's perfect timing will he deliver his perfect promises. It's okay to question. It's okay to ask, God, what's happening right now? Because I don't understand. As long as when God answers, we say, okay, God, I trust in your sovereignty. I trust in your timing. I'll trust in your plan. The second thing that we have to take from the text this morning, if we're going to make it through what is happening season, is that the name of Isaac means laughter, or he laughs. You may be waiting on a promise today, but when God delivers, and by the way, he always does. Come on. I said when God delivers, and he will deliver every single time. If God said he would do it, I guarantee you that he will do it, because to not do something that he said would make him not God. He will always deliver on his promises. And you may be going through a season of waiting, and you may be going through a season of asking, God, what is happening in my life right now? But when he delivers, he will take your mourning and he'll turn it into laughter. He'll turn it into gladness. He'll turn it into joy. He'll take what was once barren and he will make it fruitful and multiply it. And he will do what he said that he would do. He'll turn your waiting into worship. God will bring joy into a barren situation. And you may be sitting here this morning and be thinking, Pastor Ryan, that sounds really good. It's a good old story from the Bible, way back when. But I'm in the middle of a season right now. Right now, I'm asking, what's happening? God, I don't understand why I'm here. I don't understand why I'm still waiting. God, I know that I heard from you. God, I'm standing on your promises as the foundation of my life, but I don't see any progress toward the promise. I don't know what is happening. So when is God going to make good on the promises that he has given me? It's a fair question to ask. And the simplest and most truthful answer that I have is I do not know. I don't know why you have to wait. I don't know why I have to wait. I don't know why we go through seasons of life. And sometimes when we look back on seasons, we can think, that's why God made me wait. Now it all makes sense. But can we just be real and say that we look back on some seasons of life and we think, I don't know why I went through that. I don't know why I had to go through that. We just have to understand the sovereignty of God. The plan of God is so great, so vast, that we cannot comprehend it. That there was a reason that God took us through that season, even if we never understand what it was. We can ask the question, what is happening, as long as we come down on the sovereignty of God. We can trust that no matter where we are, God always knows exactly where that is. He hasn't forgotten about the promises that he made you. He hasn't forgotten the promises of his word that you have been standing on. And he will come through every single time. We can take hope in the fact that God has never failed on a promise. Never. He's batting 1,000. Somebody steps up to the plate and they bat, 350, 400. That's amazing. God is batting 1,000. Perfect. Every single time that he said that he was going to do something, he's done it. When God says something, you can take it to the bank. Guaranteed every single time. So when you're going through a season of what's happening right now, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I here? It's okay to question. It's okay to ask God, what's going on in my life, God? I need you to give me some clarity about this situation. As long as you understand that if God said it, it will happen. He's never gone back on a promise, and I don't believe that he's going to start with you, and I don't believe that he's going to start now. If you believe that, will you stand with me?